Through 5 years of rabbinical school, I've mastered getting by in just a couple of hours of sleep a night. All I need is a couple of hours and I'm fine. And yet I found with a newborn, there were nights when I've longed for just a couple of hours. With a baby, I've been told that a couple of hours a night is a successful night. When I first went away to my student pulpit, Congregation Ahavat Israel in Kingston, New York, after Kayla's birth, I was hesitant to leave for the weekend without her. My wife Andrea reminded me that at least I get a good night's sleep. And yet, missing my wife and daughter that weekend, I found myself on Sunday speeding down the New York State Thruway, trying to get home as fast as I could. All I wanted to do was get home, kiss my wife, and hold my daughter. Now I admit, Moses had a much greater task than just going to his pulpit for Shabbos. He set off for Egypt with his brother by his side, clearly leaving his wife and 2 sons behind, acting as God's messenger with the goal of setting Bnei Israel free. But when he returned, he did not speed across the desert to his family. We learn at the beginning of this week's Torah portion, Parashat Yitro, chapter 18 of the book of Exodus, that Moses, following the crossing of the sea from slavery into freedom, is reunited with his family. ויבוא יתרו חותן משה ובניו אשתו אל משה אל המדבר אשר הוא חונה שם הר האלוהים. ויאמר אל משה אני חותנך יתרו בא אליך ואשתך ושני בניך עמה. ויצא משה לקראת חותנו וישתחו וישקלו וישאלו איש רעהו לשלום ויבואו האוהלה. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought Moses' sons and his wife to him in the wilderness where he was camped out at the mountain of God. And he announced, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your children. And Moses went out to greet his father-in-law, to greet Yitro, and he bowed low and kissed him. They each asked of each other's welfare, and together they went into the tent. Moses sat and waited for his family. And ultimately, when they came to him, he did not kiss his wife. He did not hold his sons. He bowed low, and he kissed the Kohen Midian, the high priest of Midian. Anyone who's ever loved someone and longed for that person is troubled by this. Why didn't Moses embrace his wife and kids first? Why did he instead embrace Yitro? Abarbanel, the 15th century Torah commentator, explained that it was unbecoming for a man to go out and meet his wife, let alone his children. Abraham ibn Ezra, the 12th century Spanish Torah scholar, suggested that it was not the custom of a respected man to call out and greet his family. Whatever the explanation may be, I would think that Abarbanel and Ibn Ezra spent some nights sleeping on the couch as a result of their comments. Ibn Ezra redeems himself a little bit by adding that Moses had a great deal of respect for Yitro because of his wisdom. So he greeted Yitro before his own family. The Kli Yakar says that the timeline of the Torah is incorrect, not in chronological order. And this event happens after Matan Torah, after the revelation at Mount Sinai. And so as the Israelites were instructed to separate themselves from their wives prior to receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai, all the more so Moses did this, until his father-in-law returned his wife to him at this moment. But still he sat and waited and did not greet her. He did not kiss his sons. A reunion and embrace with his wife and sons is what we, the reader, expects. In greeting Yitro first, we understand how important Moshe's relationship with Yitro is. We appreciate the unexpected here. We, the reader, the leaders of the American Jewish community, come to appreciate Moses' relationship with Yitro not as Choten Moshe, not as Moses' father-in-law, but as Kohen Midian, as the high priest of Midian. As religious leaders, there was always something special about Moses' and Jethro's relationship. I believe as rabbis we need to turn to their relationship as guidance for our future rabbinates. While we spend much time here focusing on the insular issues of the American Jewish community, the challenges facing the future of the conservative movement, we need to be more aware of and learn from other religious institutions. Look across the street. Union Theological Seminary is on the other side of the street. And yet for many of us, it feels like the other side of the world. Some of us may have taken courses there, some taken advantage of the library, others met UTS students in the Interseminary Dialogue Program. But yet, I'm suggesting a relationship more than just colleagues. After all, when Moses and Yitro see each other, the text says, Vishalu ish re'ehu l'shalom. Not just that they ask of each other's welfare. They consider the other a friend. Jethro was Moses' equal. I live a sheltered life, I admit it. I grew up going to Jewish day school. I was very involved in a Jewish youth group. I spent the past almost 10 years of my life at JTS. It's safe to say that I have very few non-Jewish friends, simply because most of the work I do, most of the people I interact with are Jews. Yet I yearn for that friend, for that religious leader from another faith, who can teach me a great deal about myself, about how to be a better rabbi. In our rabbinic work, we strive to be a leader like Moses, but we all must find for ourselves a Midianite priest to embrace, to see as our equal, and to offer us advice and good counsel. Well, I view Moses' embrace with the Kohen Minyan as momentous. I acknowledge that there are most in our tradition that are troubled by this event. Some argue that Jethro actually converted to Judaism, proven by the sacrifice he makes to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Other historical critics suggest that Midianites also worshipped Adonai, and Jethro was simply worshiping a God he already praised. I think these are convenient ways to avoid the challenges of Moses marrying a preacher's daughter and the importance of the interfaith summit between Moses and Jethro. But neither of these explanations are the answer. Jethro's statement in verse 11 is ambiguous. Declaring his supposed conversion to Judaism, he does not deny the existence of other deities. He is simply, as a person of the cloth, acknowledging the beauty of our religion and of our God. How wonderful would it be if we were able to do the same about other religions, to learn from them and to grow as rabbis and Jews because of these relationships. Maybe this was something ingrained in me at an early age. After all, when my father was serving as a young rabbi in Connecticut, he became friendly with a young minister close by. That minister, now the Episcopalian bishop of the state of Arizona, was symbolically named my godfather when I was born. I imagine my father and the Right Reverend Kirk Smith strolling down the street like Ben Stiller and Edward Norton and keeping the faith. But most importantly, I know that their friendship led to both of them being better religious leaders. I figured such a relationship must be easy. While serving my congregation in Kingston, I thought, why not put together an interfaith Thanksgiving program? The response, be it from minister or priest, pastor or imam, even fellow rabbis in the community, was apathy. They believe they have enough issues to deal with in their own houses of worship. Why spend their time and energy with other clergy, with people of other faiths? The answer, knowing the other, helps us to know our own selves. Knowing the other helps us to know our own selves. I'm proud of my mother. She was determined to learn about the other and to know the other. She didn't want those across the street to feel like they were on the other side of the world. So on her own, she reached out to the local mosque in central New Jersey and organized a discussion group. Regularly, 6 Jewish women and 6 Muslim women meet to socialize, eat, and discuss each other's faiths. We as rabbinic leaders have an obligation to reach out to those from other faiths, to learn from them. Admittedly, this is partially for our benefit. When Chancellor Eisen at the beginning of the year spoke to the Rabbinical School student body, he said, it's up to us to reinvigorate worship services. It's no surprise then that over a decade ago, Synagogue 2000, now Synagogue 3000, sent their convention delegation to Saddleback Church in Los Angeles. Why? To see the potential in a worship service by experiencing another's worship service. And who knows? The counsel we receive from clergy of other faiths can have a lasting impact. When Moses was quickly becoming burnt out as a leader, answering every question and addressing every need of the people, Jethro provided advice and good counsel. Beginning in verse 17, Yitro tells Moshe, Lo tov hadavar asher ata oseh. Navol tibol gam ata gam ha'am hazeh asher imach. Ki kaved mimcha davar lo tuchal ashu levadecha. Ata shema b'koli i'atzcha v'hi Elohim imach. What you are doing is not right. You'll surely wear yourself out and these people as well. For the task is too heavy for you and you cannot do it alone. Now listen to my voice. For I will give you counsel and God will be with you. To think that the entire basis, the entire structure of our legal and judicial system comes from the advice of the Kohen Midyan. This fact stands out not just to us, but to people of other faiths as well. This moment exemplifies the power that the advice of one religious leader can have on another religious tradition. Although very little is written about Jethro in the writings of the church fathers, there's one comment that considers the prominence of Moshe's response to the Midianite priest's advice. It says, "When I consider that Moses, a full prophet of God, to whom God spoke face to face, took the advice of Jethro, the priest of Midian, am full of admiration so great it sends me into a stupor. Scripture says that Moses heard the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he advised. He listened and did all that Jethro said of him, considering not who spoke, but what he said. We, similarly, if we encounter by chance words of wisdom pronounced by those of another faith, we must not immediately reject them because of their author. Instead, we examine them and learn from them." What a concept. If Moses was willing to learn from the other, then we must too. Moses spoke directly to God and was still able to see the godliness in Jethro's words. Israel becomes a nation not through Moshe Rabbeinu, our people's greatest leader and prophet and teacher, but through the advice of another religious leader. Because ultimately, all faiths and beliefs are intertwined. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, of blessed memory, taught that no religion is an island. Judaism is sooner or later affected by the intellectual, moral, and spiritual events within the Christian society and vice versa. Our goal is not to flatter or refute the other. It's not to prove a point, to say that I am right, that she is wrong. Our goal, Heschel adds, is to help one another, to share insight and learning, to cooperate in academic ventures on the highest scholarly level, and what is even more important, to search in the wilderness for wellsprings of devotion, for treasures of stillness, for power of love and care for man. What is urgently needed are ways of helping one another. This is why these relationships are so important. This is why we're better rabbis and better Jews, because of these relationships. This is why Moshe bowed low, kissed the high priest of Midian, and brought him into his tent. And while we may ultimately benefit from these interactions, we do not only do it for ourselves. If we're to truly be an Or L'Goyim, a light unto the nations, then we must embrace those of other nations, of other faiths, to learn from them, and at times, to stand up for them. As religious leaders, we must do so. We must get our community involved in doing so as well. After all, the Mechilta teaches that Moshe did not greet Yitro on his own. He was joined by his brother Aaron, by Aaron's sons, by the elders of Israel, even by the Shekhinah, God's earthly presence. We must embrace the other as a community, because someone like Ovadia Yosef cannot be the only rabbinic voice the world hears. The former chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel and religious leader of the Shas party gives a sermon suggesting that non-Jews were born only to serve Jews. Without that, they have no place in the world. That cannot be the only rabbinic voice. To be a light unto the nations is to show the world that the views of one particular rabbinic leader are not the views of the many. When Pastor Terry Jones sponsors a Burn the Koran Day on September 11th, we need to show the world that the answer isn't to hate the other, but to embrace the other. When the nation is consumed in debates over the building of the Islamic Cultural Center downtown, we need to stand up in our houses of worship for the rights of other houses of worship. Well, too many of us simply treated this past Monday as an extra day of vacation. Monday was Martin Luther King Day. the national holiday, celebrating, remembering, and honoring the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. King taught us all about the power that we hold as Klei Kodesh, as clergy. He taught us about the power of prayer and the power of faith, the power of love, and the power of words, the power of words of Torah. In perhaps the greatest sermon ever delivered, Reverend King shared his dream for the future. And here at JTS, and I think in most of the American Jewish community, we cannot picture Martin Luther King without imagining Abraham Joshua Heschel standing by his side. In one of the most well-known embraces of clergy, Reverend King and Rabbi Heschel stood arm in arm, marching in Selma, Alabama, fighting against hatred and injustice. Rabbi Heschel did not sit idly by to observe the suffering and persecution of the other. Instead, he embraced Reverend King. A modern-day Moshe and Yitro, Heschel and King are the perfect example of what we strive for, creating meaningful relationships with people of other faiths, with leaders of other faith communities. Heschel showed support for King and the need for true civil rights. And like Yitro, King taught Heschel, which had a lasting impact on him. Heschel, the theologian, believe it or not, said a Jew must take a leap of action, not a leap of thought. That leap of action begins here with Vishtachu Vishat Lo. It begins with the embrace of Moses and Jethro. For hate speech is the inability to accept the other and to live with the other, to coexist. If we do not embrace the other, then we're simply a bunch of Cains, destined to slay our brothers. We must be more than our brothers' keepers. We must be their colleagues. We must be their friends. Our task as conservative Jews is a great one, to believe what we believe is right and right for us, while still acknowledging the existence of other faiths and religious traditions. We do not proselytize or serve as missionaries. Our goal is not to get everyone else to be just like us. Instead, our goal and our task is to be the best us that we can be. Because we're better because of those that we surround ourselves with. I know my Judaism is strengthened and renewed living in America. Learning and interacting with those of other faiths in a predominantly Christian world allows me to be a better Jew, allows me to be a better rabbi. As a result, I'm proud of who I am and of what I believe. So I invite all of you, all of us, to forge those relationships, to find those Midianite priests, to embrace them and welcome them into our tents. For as we go out into the world to serve the Jewish community, may we always be reminded of the relationship of Moshe and Yitro. And may we become better rabbis and better human beings as we try to emulate their shared knowledge, their mutual respect, and their friendship. After all, earlier in Shemot, chapter 2 of Exodus, Yitro is called Reuel, meaning friend of God. If our task as rabbis is to help others experience God and recognize God's presence in all moments of life, then we need to embrace Reuel. May we understand and respect each individual, Jew and non-Jew alike, as a Reuel, a friend of God, and ultimately a friend of ours as well.